it isn't as though we've got 20 years to do this. We have, and every new kid on the block has to get these done like right away. Right away. You've got investors. We've got, we've got Vantage Point. We've got Chevron. We've got Alstom. We've got a lot of people with very, want us to be giving them their money back in a very short amount of time. They didn't bargain for being shareholders for us for 20 years. They bargained for 3, 4, 5 years. They want to get their money out. That means we've got a lot of problems that we have to solve here in a very short amount of time. Nor do we have utilities coming in and saying, thank God we've got these guys. These guys are the ones who, by the way, ought to really be congratulated, because they are willing to take a risk on technologies, PG&E and Southern California Edison, that are not completely tested yet, but they're willing to do it. They're not willing to rate base it yet, because they're not crazy. They're not going to rate base until they know that the technology is proven. But they're willing to have contracts with us, the PPAs, 20-year, 25-year PPAs. Of course, the risk is on us to perform, but we're fine with that. So, to make this thing work, really to make it work, and I know it from all the different angles, I think I do, takes a huge amount of regulatory infrastructure and change, a lot of willingness by the utilities and by the state agencies in particular to take risk in order for benefit to happen, public benefits. And again, I'm going to go back to the first point I made. If we didn't care about climate change, if we didn't care about energy security, if we didn't care about any of that stuff, you could say, forget about all this. Let's just keep using coal. Let's just keep, we don't need any new kids on the block. We don't need to take risks. But as soon as you say, I really want to hedge my bets, and I want to hedge my bets in an intelligent way, I want to develop clean energy, then this is what you're going to have to deal with. And you're going to have to do it in a relatively short amount of time. I think at this point I better stop.
Well, you have about 15 minutes, and whether you want to do your presentation or continue to take questions and answers, Joshua, is completely up to you. I just wanted to make sure that you had content you wanted to cover in your presentation.
The rest of this is sort of getting to the details of what we have to do, and and this is really just a summary of my own particular list of things that I had to do during the 5.5 years that I was at Bright Source. Just a ridiculous amount of public arena, regulatory policy, legislative issues. Ray here is, they were our FERC counsel. It just goes on and on and on. And maybe I will let you just, if you have any questions. I guess I could say that probably the most frustrating part of the job was probably electric transmission. That was, I think, the big surprise for me, having been in the utility, is that you think that the thing that utilities can do the easiest and have been doing for 100 years would just have been kind of a natural thing. Let's just get a 60-mile line built. But in fact, transmission is turning out to be just a huge obstacle. It shouldn't be. There's no technical reason for it. Absolutely no technical reason.
Josh, well, there's probably about a half dozen key steps that we need to achieve in order to get the project financed and built. And why don't you talk a little bit about harmonizing those steps and to meet the commercial needs or the grid side?
Well, okay, sure. The first thing we had to do was we had to go to the utilities. And thank God we've got very enlightened, great utilities in California, and get PPAs with them. So the PPAs take, I don't know, roughly half a year to negotiate, and in our case, 2.5 gigawatts is a lot of energy. And it's delivery dates of every 8 months for the next tranche, adding up to about 2.5 gigawatts. then you need to start the permitting process. And the permitting process is ridiculously complicated. You have to, of course, get land from the BLM. You'd think that would be, well, all of these things were much more complicated than I thought they would be. And what's really kind of interesting about the energy business, about the renewable energy business, is how federal and state arenas, jurisdictional arenas, are unmeshed and oftentimes in conflict with each other. You don't even know who, I mean, land issues alone, BLM, California Energy Commission, California State Department of Fish and Game, everybody wants a piece of the pie. Everybody wants to say what they think. So there's no rational. The most rational, I'll tell you who the most rational party in this whole process from the government point of view was our California Public Utilities Commission. There, I truly have to congratulate them for always having kind of their eye on the ball and doing things on time. So permitting, approval of contracts, approval of the building of a 400 megawatt project at Ivanpah. I'm sorry, I'll let you ask questions.
How much of the capital intensity is the regulatory hurdle? And are those regulations protecting everybody, or is it just the result of inertia?
Can't hear the question.
The question is how much of the cost of the project is ultimately kind of the cost of regulation, and how expensive.
Are those regulations protecting anything, or is it just saving this?
Well, that's sort of the classic American question. I would say that the problem with the cost of regulation, if you're talking about in terms of a $2.5 billion project, how much does it cost for us to actually get our regulatory permits? I mean, you know, $30, $40 million. But so, I mean, in terms of actual cost of getting the permits, it isn't that much. The problem with permitting in America, I don't think this is just California, so I'll say America, is that it changes all the time. New people, you know, these days in California, for example, suddenly the California regulatory authority, the energy officials sort of say smaller is better, closer in is better. And so suddenly projects that are out in the desert, which they all favored a few years ago, are suddenly in disfavor. So you constantly have to deal with changes in staff at the PUC, at the CEC, who all kind of have come up with a new way of looking at the world. I'm sorry, what the other part of your question was?
Do the regulations really protect?
Well, no. I mean, some of them do and some of them don't. Again, I think that if I were to evaluate the rules that the PUC imposed, they were entirely reasonable. And I think that the PUC approach to the market price reference, all the policies that sort of induced us to be competitive, prove the contracts, let interview, I think all that was very, very reasonable. If I had to look at the part that's been unreasonable, it's the what I would call the environmental part of the regulation.